Hi, Shara. It's so wonderful to have you here with us today, just a little bit before your first trip to Wheeling, West Virginia, where you're going to be performing two incredible concerts next week. We can't wait to welcome you into West Virginia.
I'm so excited. I've never done a double header in 1 week of Penelope and the Blue Hour, and I'm really, really thrilled at this opportunity.
We are as well. And it's been a beautiful thing to spend the last 90 minutes or so talking about the city, about our orchestra, and about the music that we're going to perform together. And we talked a little bit at the beginning of our conversation that we had one on one about the context within what's going on in the world, what's going on in our country right now, about that the place that pieces like this can hold, and how coming together as a community to think about the questions that these pieces raise can be profoundly important. What are you hoping for people that maybe are unfamiliar with both of these works, that they can prepare themselves as humans before they see us in the concert hall?
One of the oldest stories that we have is Homer's Odyssey. And so the piece Penelope is looking at that old story and asking, both from Penelope's perspective, from some of the different characters inside of the Odyssey, um, what is it about finding home? What is home after war and loss of memory, loss of connection to land? How do you find your way back home? And so Penelope is really kind of looking at some of that. And I hope that as we sit in a meditation, in a sense, on that
Mm.
old story, um, that we can have an outlet for our own feelings of lostness, but also for the power of love to bring us to home.
Because as the audience hears the text to Penelope, yes, there's a retelling of the Odyssey story from Penelope's perspective in a general sense, but the poetry that Ellen wrote that ended up being the libretto for the piece talks a little bit more about a modern story, a modern
Mhm.
veteran of war. Could you talk about the framework that you and the creative team for this project underwent to combine a familiar story from the past with this more tactile story that we also experience at the same time?
Yeah, I think Ellen, when she originally wrote that piece, she was wanting to recontextualize it. What do these stories look like in our present day, and how do we distill them, in a sense, taking away some of the details of Homer's Odyssey and looking at these universal,
Mm.
shared experiences. And so I think she did an amazing job of looking at that. Of, Nausicaa says, "Don't be afraid, stranger. I'm here. Just take my hand." And so there's these beautiful, kind of very simple moments, um, that certainly ring true over circumstance.
Mhm. And the genre of Penelope is one of the most interesting parts about the project, right? You're going to hear sounds within the orchestra that are traditional classical music sounds. You'll hear a violin, you'll see a conductor, you'll hear a vocalist, but there's also layering of your own voice into
Hmm.
the piece in pre-recorded way. There's a drum set and a guitar that brings in a little bit of rock influence, pop influence. How do you describe in your words the sound world and the paradigm of the ensemble that people will see with the Penelope project?
Yeah, it's certainly classical in that, you know, the measures are changing all the time, but Zappa was changing measures all the time too. So that doesn't necessarily mean, it's necessarily quote unquote classical music. I think the context of the strings just kind of sets us in that historical tradition in that
Right.
lineage, but I'm singing with a microphone and not
Mhm.
in an operatic style. Um, so immediately the sound becomes more pop in lineage. Um,
Mhm.
I don't really think about genre so much, but um, I think that because I don't sing in a necessarily operatic style, I am trained as an opera singer, but
Right.
using a microphone and having electronics and um, having sort of sound effects, it kind of then lives in this in the cracks of genre kind of space.
Right. Because I think that the job of orchestras is changing pretty rapidly right now. And the Wheeling Symphony is one of the orchestras, as I was describing to you, that is making sure that we are providing the amplification of projects like this one. Because I think that it's very important for the city of Wheeling to see, like, this is where we're going with the future. And there's always, one time there was no piccolo in an orchestra, and then another time there was no xylophone, and there was no harp. And we're adding these textures and these sounds and these instruments and microphones and drum sets and guitars are just becoming more and more standard as we evolve. And as what my ensemble has to do, what I'm being asked to do as a conductor, we
Mm.
didn't learn how to conduct a piece like Penelope. I never put a click track monitor in my ear during grad school, but we're thinking like, okay, what is American music? What is modern music? What is orchestral and what is chamber and what is pop? And I love the fact that those lines are blurred because, yeah, the genre almost ceases to matter. It's just music and poetry now. And um, speaking of blending, the other project that we'll embark upon next week together is the Blue Hour. This piece has been around for far fewer years than Penelope has. I mean, I think this is something like the fifth or sixth time the piece has been performed since it was given birth to, and this is a collaboration not just between a librettist, a vocalist, and an orchestra, but between several composers. Um, it's so interesting because as I studied the work, because I'm familiar with the language of the different composers, this is the first time I'm working on music you composed, actually, though. You saw the idiosyncratic differences of how text was set, or some composers stayed more in the modern lineage, like Angelica's movements tend to feel that way, whereas Caroline's movements sometimes are much like just indicated to look backwards. We're thinking about the mass or religious music or chant.
Mhm.
How does it feel for you to go for something that's pretty similar in terms of your approach, probably mentally, like Penelope, to something that's a little more schizophrenic in Blue Hour? How do you, as an artist, come and put all of this into one cohesive whole for yourself?
To make it more complicated, the text is an abecedarian, so it's alphabetical, and it's a, um, Carolyn Forche wrote the poem basically in a sitting. So she feels like she channeled the piece, and it was this reflection of human consciousness passing from life until into whatever's next.
Right.
And so I think like the language is image, 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 and it's sort of the whole of life and the whole of human consciousness flashing before you.
Mm,
So it's kind of like the moments before death, when the mind is reviewing all of everything that's happened in your life. So I think as an interpreter of that, I have to accept that there is no kind of emotional narrative. It's more accepting the fact that not only do the composers change frequently, but the text itself is changing so rapidly to go, you know, the piece is 74 minutes of music, but the images are changing constantly.
right. Because if one entered the experience as an audience member, hoping that the text will create a narrative for them. That's not what's going to happen. In fact, there's a lot of intentional non sequiturs. There are words that are spoken seemingly at random, but that alphabetization that you talked about, there will be six words in a row that start with the letter F, and then we'll kind of settle on one, and that will then be the moment that we carry forward musically, right? Um,
You kind of
so
just have to accept that that narrative isn't going to happen. And I think that there's a kind of expectation for most audiences, myself included, that there would be a narrative to follow, but the accumulation of all of that at the end is this kind of a bigger glimpse at the end of the piece. I think there's a sense of like, okay, we've come through something, and I was allowed to go on this internal journey that happens for the audience in their own mind, without needing to follow a secret code that's happening.
right. Now, I think it will be interesting for the audience to observe the passing of the alphabetical order
Mhm.
element. And then there's something so symbolic to me at the end where we talked about there may be one letter that was skipped, and maybe we can see if the audience identifies that. But then at the end, the 39th movement, zero. But then, isn't it a gorgeous thing to think about? The final refrain, Caroline Shaw wrote a refrain that occurs three times where the music is the same. And it feels like a chant in terms of the way it's laid out. Guess what letter that refrain starts with? So that after zero, it's all of us, right?
Mhm.
A. There's some new beginning that's going to happen. And I think that for a lot of people right now, there's a new beginning is something that we would be okay with thinking about, and what would that look like? Um, I don't want to spoil the surprise, but it is such a gorgeous way that the last refrain is delivered to the audience. Something that's unexpected, I think, in terms of who's singing and how it's happening.
Yeah, it's a movement from the individual to all, all.
And so I think that's how we want next week to feel for our audience in Wheeling, that it's for everyone.
Hmm.
We hope that we can gather, and in some ways, this will be a collective meditation. Uh, I can't wait for our community to meet you, and thank you for coming to Wheeling, West Virginia.
I am so excited to come to Wheeling. This is such a gift.